while we're running all the kids out of here, I want to talk about something that was just brought to my attention this morning. Brenda, where are you sitting at? There you are. Stand up. All right, see this lady sitting down here on the right side. Okay, her name is Brenda Tyson. What she does, I hauled that knothead son of hers back and forth to school for a long time. And so I noticed that when I would pull up in front of their house, every year he had inherited a new brother or sister. And I thought, how are they doing that? And I learned that it was for an exchange student. And so Brenda, she is involved in that on an international level. And she is looking for families. And don't you find this kind of interesting, since VCU is a church that is working and ministering into 3 different communities, Lawson, Richmond, and Excelsior. And the Lord sends her here to this church. She could have gone to a church in Lawson or a church in Richmond or a church in Excelsior, but he brought her here. And what she's looking for, because Lawson is full right now, but she's looking for families that would have an interest in taking on foreign exchange students for next year. Is that right? Okay, in Excelsior and in Richmond. So what I want you to do is get a good look at her face. She's going to be in the lobby after church is over, and go up and talk to her, because I know nothing about this and she knows everything about this. And so she can talk to you personally, and if there's some of you that kind of gather around and want some information, then she can tell you what the program looks like, how you do it, all of that stuff, what qualifies you to be a family, that type of stuff. So, and she'll take Lathrop. Hey, if the Lord wants to grow us into Lathrop, then we'll just go to Lathrop too. So, all right. Okay, I think I have done as much of Brad's job as I can do. Normally, I'm not doing the announcements up here, so I think that I've got that done. Now it's time to do my job. Here we are, week number 6, the family project. And I appreciate what Gavin had to say a while ago in regards to just burnout, exhaustion, that type of thing, because it's really easy to get caught up in the busyness of life. And then when you take on all of the junk that's out there, and it just, you're listening to this on the news and you're watching this stuff on television, and it's really easy to become mentally exhausted. And I think that's where we tend to break down a lot of times, is not the physical as much as it's the mental. You just get so beat up mentally that you just want to just stop doing everything. You just want something to give you a break. You look for a relief valve, if you will. And here we are talking about the family. And the video that we watched in our life groups this week was one that really, I'm telling you, when I first looked at it, it just took the air out of me. And I just thought, man, it's just another reminder of what we're dealing with as a church in this culture, in this society. The title for this week's lesson is What God Has Joined Together. And we're going to look at some hard issues this morning. We're going to look at some things that a lot of churches won't touch. And those that are touching it, in many cases, aren't addressing it correctly. And I'm just asking my Father to give me clarity this morning, and that I communicate the truth of His Word in a way that it doesn't hurt, but in a way that it brings clarification. And so I'm going to ask you to pray with me. Father, this is not a week that has been easy. There's been a lot of activity and a lot of things going on, and what we're looking at right now, this divisiveness that Satan has been very successful at in bringing into the family unit. And Father, it just breaks our hearts. And the church has been very silent for a long time now, and that's got to stop. We've got to speak the truth, but we've got to do it in an effective way, not in a destructive or a combative manner. We have to be true to what we know you have taught us as a truth. And so we're praying for discernment. We're praying for knowledge. We need wisdom. to live our lives every day in a culture that's fighting against us, in a culture that's wanting to take the family apart, that's wanting to redefine marriage, that's wanting to redefine the family. We need the courage to just stand for truth. I ask this in your name, Jesus. Amen. We're going to look at a passage of Scripture in Mark chapter 10, verses 2 through 9. It says, the Pharisees came up, and in order to test him, they asked, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife? And he said to them, what did Moses command you? That's an interesting statement. It's an interesting question. If you look at it very closely, what did Moses command you? In other words, he told them to do something. They said, well, Moses allowed a man. That's their answer. But Jesus' question is very different. What did Moses command you? They answered, well, Jesus allowed a man to write a certificate of divorce to send her away. And Jesus said to them, because of your hardness of heart, he wrote you this commandment. He gave an instruction. But from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. And therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they're no longer two, but one flesh. And listen to what he says in verse 9. What therefore God has joined together, let not man separate. Now, what I want to point out to you in the early moments of this message, and I've put it on your outline, is this. Neither God nor Moses gave man permission to divide the family. And oftentimes we look at scripture like this as if we've been given a permission slip to do something. Well, if certain conditions arise, we can and we ought to. And even the church has gotten caught up in this. So you have to wonder, so why was divorce allowed? Divorce was granted by Moses because men were abandoning their wives. They were throwing them to the curb, if you will, with no protection in a society when they needed protection. And they were just casting them aside for any and every reason. And when Moses was watching and witnessing this, he brought about a commandment, if you will, that forced men to write a certificate of divorce for their wives. Now remember what we've learned about the bride price of a woman back in this culture in this time. The bride price was not given to the girl's father in the sense of like slavery or ownership. The bride price was given to the girl's dad as a trust fund, if you will. And it belonged to the bride. It didn't belong to her dad. It didn't belong to her family. They couldn't utilize the money or spend the money. It was to be kept in a safe, secure place for her. In the event that her husband died or he decided, I don't like the girl no more. I don't want to live with this girl. She had something to fall back on. She had something she could go to and draw, but she had to have that certificate of divorce. There had to be a clear document that stated she is no longer under his protection and provision. So divorce was granted to protect the woman. Financially, that would allow her to remarry if that happened or if that possibility arose for her. So Moses, and Jesus reiterated this, commanded the men, you do right by her if this is what you're going to do. And Jesus said, why did divorce happen? Because of the hardness of your hearts. And if you're not changing, if you're not going to step up to the plate, guys, and do what you ought to do in the first place, I'm not going to let you throw these women to the curb. There's going to be a protection for them. And that's why we have this scripture. That's why it's here for us to look at. Now, I want to speak to those of you that have experienced the pain of divorce, because many of you have. You've gone through this and you've experienced this. And there's nothing, I don't know there's anything more painful than divorce. In 25 years of pastoring and counseling with people, talking with people, I have found that this is one of the most hurtful, painful things an individual can endure. And I want you to know, I don't want to add guilt or pain on you because of that. Because divorce happens for a number of reasons. There's all kinds of things that cause it, and it happens. It's just a part of our society. But I believe, because I've yet to meet anyone that has gone through divorce, ever want that for anyone else, especially their children. We've talked about this before. Nobody walks an aisle. Nobody comes and stands before a preacher and all of their friends and family look each other in the face and say, I hate you and you hate me. Let's get married and make each other miserable for the rest of our lives. Nobody does that. And yet a lot of those marriages that begin with so much love and so much hope end tragically. And VCU is not going to be a place that puts guilt on people that have lived through the experience of divorce. But we will be a church, and I think that you would stand with us in this, that will fight for marriage and make sure that it never happens again to other people. And I talked with a couple this week, and I said, I'm going to go to battle for you. I'm going to fight for this, and I expect you to do the same thing, because VCU is not going to roll over. But we will stand up and we will do everything we can to partner with you and stand with you against the attack that Satan is bringing on you. It is our mission to protect the family. Because listen to me, the Lord I serve is still in the business of putting families back together. And I've seen some horrible situations when it didn't appear to be any hope whatsoever at all. And I saw the Lord do something, and I saw hearts break, and I saw people soften, and I saw marriages restored. Not back to the condition they were, but better than they ever thought. And some of you are sitting out here right now, and you know exactly what I'm talking about because you've experienced that in your own marriages. Marriage was designed by God to build family in order to reflect his image and to establish healthy societies. Remember a few weeks ago we talked about the imagery of the Trinity of God and the marriage, the family unit, the husband, the wife, and the children, and how that when you start drawing the parallels, when you put them both in columns and you start drawing the parallels, and we did that. We identified the attributes of God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit, and we could make direct connections to the family units, to the husband, to the wife, to the children. We could see it. And it was amazing how that when the Bible tells us that God created man in his image, that's what he was talking about, the family. He was talking about how those attributes would show themselves in men and show themselves in women, and equally, men and women equally would be able to display the fullness of God and the Trinity of God and the community of God. And it was an amazing, it's an amazing message for me to preach. I don't know, maybe if y'all didn't get it, but I got it. And it was a lot of fun to preach that message and bring that to you. But Satan has been working to divide the family. And that's why people get divorced. And that's why that society is working to redefine what marriage is meant to be. When I watched the video this week, as I was talking earlier, I'm going to tell you something. When I watched it the first time, I got sick in my stomach listening to some of these people. I really did. It just makes me sick to see how depraved the thinking of society has become in regards to the family. One man, one woman, get married, then have sex, then raise a family of children that will repeat that same thing. Find a girl, find a guy, get married, have more children, repeat again. Find a girl, find a guy, get married, repeat, have more children. That's God's design. And the society in which we live seems to be becoming more combative against that design all the time. I want you to look at this last verse, because here's what you need to understand. Satan is still up to his old tricks. The exact same tricks that we saw in the garden with Eve, we are still seeing today played out in deceiving people. And you look at this last verse in our main text this morning, what therefore God has joined together, let man not separate. On your outline, guys, here's what that means. What God has designed, no one has the right to change. What God has designed, no one has the right to change. You see, what Jesus is saying here, guys, this isn't a request. It's not a suggestion. It's a direct statement from God that what he has established in regards to the family, listen to me, will not undergo change. What God has defined the family to be, what God has defined marriage to be, will not undergo change. Now, the Supreme Court can do whatever it wants. The culture can attempt to redefine marriage however it chooses. And they can even try to redefine what family looks like. But the family is, and it always will be, exactly what God designed it to be. And listen to me carefully. God will always make sure there is a remnant of people that are standing for that and fighting for that until Jesus comes back. So don't lose heart. Although it looks bad, do not lose heart. Because it's important that we not let what's happening in the world discourage us and beat us down. Now, some of you are sitting here and you're thinking, preacher, there's an elephant in the room you're ignoring. And that elephant in the room is that marriage has already undergone change. Family's already undergone change. People get divorced. Same-sex marriages are happening all over the place. People are redefining what the family can look like. And I read you some examples of that just a few weeks ago. You know, where you got two gay people that are in a relationship with a woman, and they have two twin children, and they're all three raising them together. And then another situation where you had 6 people living in a house, and one of them got pregnant to have a child so that all 6 of them could be known as mommy and daddy and raise this one child, and the child has no idea who. Now that's going on. All of that's true. But listen to me when I say this. It still doesn't change truth. You see, you can call a dog a cat. You can call a horse a cow. You can call a table a chair. But it doesn't change the truth, does it? So it doesn't matter what they're saying. It doesn't matter what they are doing. It still cannot change the truth. You see, here's what we need to be doing as the church. This is what the church, the body of Christ, needs to be doing. It simply needs to hold to the truth about family and stay true to its intended purpose. Don't compromise and don't back down. Just keep holding to that truth and keep promoting family as it was designed to be. We just keep doing what we do. We just keep moving on. And we keep teaching our children to do the same thing. And we keep teaching our grandchildren to do the same. And we equip them. We equip people with the tools to be able to stand against the attacks against the family and society. You see, as we do this, the church is going to get persecuted. As we do this, we're going to come under attack as we already are. But here's what's interesting. When you study the history of the church, and the history of the church is a little over 2,000 years old, and when you study the history of the church, do you realize that every time a culture tried to attack the church and tried to silence the church and tried to eliminate the church, what happened to the church? It grew. It exploded. It got bigger. So let them bring the attacks. Let them come against us. Because as they fight against the truth, guess what God does? God grows the church. And I'm going to tell you, the church needs some growing right now. So that means the church needs some persecution. And we need to be standing equipped, ready to fight. Not combatively. A lot of churches are promoting that. That's not what we're promoting. But we do need to be ready to stand in the fight, stand in the gap, to do what we need to do. I want you to look at this next thing on your outline, because in a nutshell, Jesus is telling us this. Although people will attempt to change marriage, God's design for family will never change to accommodate society or the sinful nature of man. Have you ever entered into an argument with somebody that's in authority over you, and you tried to argue with them, and they just stood there and let you just rah, 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 rah. And then when they got done, they just looked at you and they said, ain't happening. Real calmly. They just said, how many of you ever gotten pulled over and gotten a speeding ticket? Come on, I'm not the only guy who gets speeding tickets. And you argue with the officer. You say, come on, man, I wasn't even driving that fast. I mean, everybody else was driving that fast. Come on, cut me a break. How many of you have done that? Cindy's sitting there shaking her head, says, yeah, that's like a weekly occurrence for me. And so she's got a lawyer on retainer. But, you sit there and you're arguing with the guy. And this officer's just standing there. The expression on his face ain't even changing. He's just listening to you. And then when you get done, he hands you the ticket and says, have a nice day, and walks off. Listen, guys, that's exactly what God is doing. That is exactly. The culture can just be raising all kinds of cane. They can be saying and doing anything they want, and it is not moving God. And it is not going to get him to change his definition of family or marriage. So we can relax in that regard. Now, I think it would be appropriate. They didn't ask me when they canonized Scripture, but I think it would be appropriate at the end of verse 9 to put an exclamation mark there. Because God is saying, or Jesus is saying, it is what it is, and man's not going to change it. Man is not going to change my position on marriage and family. Because somebody attempts to change something from its original design still doesn't change it. They can attempt all they want. They can do whatever they want to do. It's still not going to change it. It will become something else to them, but it will not change what it is in its original state. You see, God's design of the family is what has been shaping societies for millenniums. It's really hard to change something that's been working for thousands and thousands of years. On your outline, guys, here's something I want you to understand. We talked about this in our life groups this week. Marriage did not evolve out of society. Societies have evolved out of marriage. You see, it wasn't society that came up with the idea of marriage. It wasn't a group of people living together and say, hey, man, what do you think? Let's start hooking up men and women together. And let's put a ceremony together and let's call it a marriage. That's not how marriage came about. God established marriage for the purpose of establishing societies. Now, here's what you need to understand. The health of every society is only as strong as the health of its families. If a society is growing, if a society is excelling, it's because families are growing and they're excelling. But when families start to deteriorate, when families start to come apart, all you got to do is watch what happens to society. And society starts to fall apart, and it becomes fragmented, and it becomes dysfunctional. A society is dependent on strong family units. This is why the church has got to keep doing what it's doing in regards to family, pushing family up, supporting families, coming alongside of families that are fighting and struggling and in trouble, and helping them to see there is hope and we're not going to quit. I loved what Greg Smalley said a couple of weeks ago. He said, when two people come together and get married, you burn the ships in the harbor. There won't be no going back, because there will be no way to go back. You burn the ships in the harbor, and you figure it out, and you fight for it. And we're living in a time where it's become commonplace to openly hear the society trying to shape the family or mold the family. We hear that society ought to be shaping the family, that society ought to be molding the family. I mean, look how many primetime television shows, Modern Family and American Dad and all this stuff, The Simpsons, all that stuff, trying to take shots at the family in order to redefine the family. They're trying to reshape the family, and sadly enough, they're very effective at it. Because people in our culture are falling for that junk, and they're believing those lies. And we're seeing all kinds of stuff being promoted in every arena, it seems like, to try to shape the family into something different than its original design. Now, we hear all the time that family can be anything anyone determines it to be. That what is family for this group of people, it may be different, it may look different than yours, but it's still family. That's simply not true. And what do we as a church do? What do we as believers do? We reject the notion. We don't embrace it and we don't ignore it. We reject it. Family is what God designed it to be. One man, one woman, having children, repeating the process. One man, one woman, having children, repeating the process. That's the design for family. Anything apart from that is not family. Any other type of group of people coming together, they can say they're family, they're not family. It's not what God defined family to be. It's not what He designed marriage to be. And it's okay to reject that notion. On the video this week, how many of you remember the woman that was being interviewed on MSNBC? And the statement that she made about privatizing the family. She said, the notion of private family needs to be done away with. That the privatizing of the family is basically what she was saying was detrimental to society. That children needed to belong to society. That's exactly what Plato believed. That's exactly what progressives believe. And we can thank Woodrow Wilson for starting that nonsense back in the early 1900s of progressive thinking. We have a candidate running for presidency that openly confesses that he is a socialist. And that is all a part of the philosophy of deprivatizing. I guess you could, is that a word, deprivatizing? I guess that'll work. The family. To making the family a community thing, a society thing, that your children belong to society. Well, I got news for you. My children, my grandchildren belong to me, and I will be the number one influence in their life. And I'm not going to apologize for that. And you shouldn't either. Your children are your children, entrusted to you by God. And you've got a responsibility to teach them, to train them, and to raise them in the ways of the Lord. And not even the church is going to get in your way of doing that. We will partner with you, and we will help you, and we will support you, and we will spend money to create facilities and programs to help you and to assist you in that. But let me tell you something, you are still in charge, and they are still your children. And when your children come running to us saying, Mom and Daddy's too strict, Mom and Daddy did this and stuff like that, you know what we're going to do? We're going to kick their butts right back to you. And we're going to stand with you and say, have at them. Because they're your responsibility. There is an agenda on your outline, guys. There is an agenda alive and well that wants to use our public schools to undermine the family and mold your children into a universal byproduct of progressive thinking and living. Now, I'm not an enemy of public schools. Good night. If I was, half our congregation school teachers. I don't know. It's just amazing to me how many school teachers God has sent to this church. I just think it's awesome. And I so much appreciate the work that you guys do, but I also sit and talk to you guys as followers of Christ, as school teachers in a public school environment, and I listen to your stories, and my heart breaks for the things that you guys are fighting and the things that you have to stand against as teachers in our public school systems, and my heart breaks for you. But I appreciate the fight that you guys are bringing to the table and the things that you're doing. But there is an agenda. Make no mistake about it. But it's not just in our public school systems. It's in our culture. How many of you remember back in 1996? Some of y'all ain't even old enough to remember 1996 because you wasn't even around. But how many of you remember a book that Hillary wrote called It Takes a Village? You remember that book back in 1996, It Takes a Village? You know, I looked that up this week, and do you know that book was on New York Times bestsellers list for 18 weeks? Man, that broke my heart that a book like that would actually be ranked that high for so long, and it was number one for 3 weeks. That's 20 years ago. And our culture 20 years ago was embracing that notion, that line of thinking, that it takes a village, it takes a community to raise a child. No, it doesn't. It takes a mom and a dad doing their job to raise a child. Guys, it doesn't take a village, it takes a family. I'm going to have Diana throw some things up on the screen that I hope that you agree with. If not, I'd like to talk with you. You don't want the public school system raising your children. You don't want the influences of Hollywood raising your children. You don't want the influences of a society that rejects Judeo-Christian views about family raising your children. And I pray you agree with those three statements. Try as the world may, God will not allow his design for family to change, and he will use the church to stand up for that which is right. He will use the church to model that which is right. And that's why we have to be faithful to our call as daddies, as mamas, and as husbands and as wives. And we cannot let anything distract us from doing our jobs. And then let the world watch us. When their worlds are falling apart and their families are disintegrating, hopefully some, as Paul said, I will be all things to all men, that in order to win some, he knew he wasn't going to win them all, and we're not going to win them all. We're not going to change the views of most of our society, but we might some. And when some of them have hit the wall and they're broken, they just might be ready to listen. And we need to be standing there modeling the design that God has given us for family so we can pick them up, hug on their necks, love on them, and say, come on, there's another way. Let me show you how. We just have to be faithful to the truth. And we just have to keep speaking the truth, and then we just have to trust our Father to do the rest. That's all we have to do. We do what we've been asked to do. Our Father will take care of the society and the culture. I appreciate the section of the video that spoke to those who choose to embrace same-sex unions and attempt to consider themselves as married or as a family. You know, when you talk to people who have fallen prey to the lies of homosexuality, the argument is always driven by one statement. And one of the guys in the video this week was being interviewed, and that was posed to him. When you look at couples that are gay and they're living together and maybe even raising children, and you look at them and you think, you know, these are these are good people. These are people that go to work every day. These are people that take care of business, and they're not out murdering, robbing banks and lying, cheating, doing all that stuff. They're good people. And you look at that, and so here's the question that always comes to the table. It always is out there. Doesn't everyone have the right to be happy? Have you ever heard that? Sure you have. Doesn't everyone have the right to be happy? And the guy's response on the video I thought was absolutely priceless, and I put it on your outline, guys. He responded this way. He said, happiness is not the measure of good. Happiness is not the measure of good. You see, just because something makes you happy, just because you get a rise out of it, doesn't make it right, and it doesn't make it good. There's all types of things that can bring happiness into your life that are sinfully wrong. There's all kinds of seasons in which we can live through an experience in life that can bring moments and experiences of happiness, but it doesn't make them right. Some of the happiest people I've ever seen are drunks that are ruining their marriages and eating up their finances. But they are happy people. Sometimes I think that more Christians maybe ought to think about that, because they're some of the sourest people I've ever been around. And I'm thinking, you could use a drink, man. Look at you. I wouldn't even want to be with you or live with you if I was you. So happiness isn't a measuring tool. Happiness doesn't mean something's good. Happiness doesn't mean that something is right. God, here's what I want you to understand. I think Christians ought to be enjoying life at a higher level than anybody else in society. Because we need to show people that God is not wanting to kill our joy. He is not wanting to suck the life out of us. Jesus said this in John 10. He said, it's the thief, it's that liar, it's that deceiver that wants to steal, to kill, and to destroy you. He said, I want to come to give you life. And I want to come to give you abundant life. And Christians, more than anybody else in the world, ought to be displaying that. We ought to be living life out loud. We ought to be living at the top of the game for others to look to. Because God did not deny us of pleasurable things. He gave us boundaries in which they could fully be enjoyed. Studies have proven, listen, let's just talk about marriage, because we just came off of our banquet last night, our Valentine's banquet last night. Studies have proven that married people who are Christians, as a general rule, are happier than anybody else in society. They make more money than anybody else in society. They live longer than anybody else in society, as a general rule. I know there's exceptions, but as a general rule, it's the design that God has established and created that when a husband and wife embrace that and they live towards that, they enjoy life at a much higher level than anyone else. They talked about this last night. Even sex is better for people who are married in a religious environment that understand the design of God's purpose for marriage. It's always better. And we ought to be pushing that up, and we ought to be displaying that to people, that our marriages are good because of Christ. Because of a relationship that we have with Christ and our Father. And we're imaging that. God isn't a killjoy. But there are things that God has determined that man doesn't have a right to change. He doesn't have a right to affect, but he must live under them and in them if he truly wants to have joy in life and the full experience that life intends for his children to know. Sexuality and marriage are two of those things that the Lord says, don't cross this line and don't change and don't attempt to do differently. You see, the Bible, it's interesting that the Bible has a lot to say about sexual immorality. And I think that that's worth noting. And we need to pay attention, because I'm going to say something in a few minutes that's going to set you back for just a minute. And then I think you'll come along with me. You'll catch up. Let's just look at one aspect of sexual immorality, because there's a lot of different aspects of sexual immorality. But let's look at the issue of homosexuality, because that's the one that seems to be in our face really pretty loudly right now. Let's look at what Paul said about that in Romans chapter 1. Let's pick it up in verse 18. God shows his anger or wrath. The better word here is wrath, and I'm going to explain that to you in a minute why. I'm not crazy about the word anger there. But it says, God shows his wrath from heaven against all sinful, wicked people who suppress the truth. Who suppress the truth. That's what's going on, and that's what we're dealing with right now, is the suppression of truth. They're trying to change it, but you can't change truth. Truth is absolute, is what it is. It is what it is. So they can't change it, but they're doing everything they can to suppress it. They know the truth about God because he has made it obvious to them. For ever since the world was created, people have seen the earth and sky. Through everything God made, they can clearly see his invisible qualities, his external power and divine nature. So they have no excuse for not knowing God. Yes, they knew God, but they wouldn't worship him as God or even give him thanks, and they began to think up foolish ideas of what God was like. As a result, their minds became dark and confused. Claiming to be wise, they instead became utter fools, and instead of worshiping the glorious ever-living God, they worshiped idols made to look like mere people and birds and animals and reptiles. Look at what it says here. It says, God abandoned them to whatever shameful things their hearts desired. As a result, they did vile and degrading things with each other's bodies. They traded the truth about God for a lie, and they worshiped and they served the things God created instead of the Creator himself, who is worthy of eternal praise. Amen. That is why God abandoned them to their shameful desires. Even the women turned against the natural way to have sex and instead indulged in sex with each other. The men, instead of having normal sexual relations with women, burned with lust for each other, and men did shameful things with other men. And as a result of this sin, they suffered within themselves the penalty they deserved. Since they thought it foolish to acknowledge God, he abandoned them to their foolish thinking, and he let them do the things that should never be done. Their lives became full of every kind of wickedness: sin, greed, hate, envy, murder, quarreling, deception, malicious behavior, gossip. They're backstabbers, haters of God, insolent, proud, boastful. They invent new ways of sinning, and they disobey their parents. They refuse to understand, break their promises, are heartless, and have no mercy. Refuse to understand. They know God's justice requires that those who do these things deserve to die, yet they do them anyway. And look at this, worse yet, they encourage others to do them too. The first thing that we need to understand about this passage is that word wrath that we see up there, because I think a lot of people misunderstand this, and this is where these false ideas come through the church that end up becoming, and they appear to be very combative. And we're not called to be combative. You see, the word wrath in the Greek is orge. It refers to, listen to me, a settled, determined indignation, not a momentary, emotional, often uncontrolled anger, which the word there is thumos, to which human beings are prone to be. So when you're talking about God's anger, when you're talking about God's wrath, do not liken it unto yours. Do not think that God one day looked down and goes, "Are you kidding me?" And he lost his temper. And he said, "Okay, because of what you did, guess what? I'm going to do this to you now." That is not what he's saying. That is not what is being talked about here. Look at the definition. It is a settled, determined indignation. How do we understand that? Let's go back to the garden. God did not curse Adam and Eve. He didn't get mad because of what they did and say, "Okay, you're out of here." You know, I did all this for you. I mean, I did everything for you, but you messed it up. You rejected my plan, so I'm throwing you out. That's not how it went down. When God created man and Adam and Eve, when he created them in his image, he said to them, do all of this and enjoy life and live it to the fullest. And we'll commune together. I'll walk with you in the cool of the day, and we'll be together, and we'll spend time together, and we will develop family, and we will establish family. But know this, if you eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, if you eat of this tree, you will yourself bring about a consequence that has already been determined, that has already been established, and that is death. If you violate what I've asked you to do and to be, you will on your own place yourself under this condition. You will usher this in upon yourself. But I have made a way in which you can live life and that you can enjoy life and you can enjoy all of the garden and everything that I have created. Matter of fact, I am going to put it under your dominion. I'm going to give you control of it. You see, when Adam and Eve failed, God did not lose his temper and get mad. God did not start thinking up ways that he could punish them. He simply told them of a condition, a consequence that would be experienced if they chose not to live according to his design. That makes sense? Do you understand that? God's wrath is not like our anger. God does not react. He responds to conditions that have always existed, that have already been settled, and conditions which can be avoided when we do the right thing and make the right choices. This ancient passage feels so familiar. And I used the NLT on purpose this morning to read that because I wanted it to have more of a contemporary read and a feel to it, because when you read through it, it's like, man, it's like reading a newspaper. It's like reading a commentary on our culture and our society. An ancient passage that's 2,000 years old feels very contemporary today, doesn't it? God says he turns them over. He turned them over to what? A consequence that they willingly exposed themselves to. Remember the questions that God asked when he came into the garden? He goes, where are you? You never had to look for him before. He goes, where are you? We've hid ourselves because we're naked. Second question, who told you you were naked? Oh, you've listened to the deceiver, haven't you? You have bought into his lies. And then that third question, that haunting third question there in Scripture. He says, what have you done? What have you done? You've rejected my design. The design that could have brought you fullness of life, the fullest experience of life. You've rejected that. And now the only thing that lies ahead of you is misery and guilt and shame. That's why they tried to clothe themselves, is because they had experienced, as we talked about last week, something that was completely foreign to them, something they had never known, and that was shame and guilt. And a lot of times people's first reaction to feeling shame and guilt is to come out defiant. But it's okay, it's right, and I can do what I want to do, and you can't judge me, and all of that's driven because there's something that's inherent in them that knows what they are doing is wrong. You know, you hear Christians and preachers say this all the time, that all sin is the same, that there is no sin that's greater than any other sin. I told you I was going to throw something at you and you were going to back up. The preachers and Christians are saying all the time, sin is sin is sin. There's no sin. Jesus himself even said it. He said, hey, if you hate your brother, you might as well have murdered him. It's the same thing. If you look after a woman with lust, it's just like having adultery with her. It's the same thing, he said. We hear this all the time. And I want to tell you that I agree with that. No sin is greater than another sin. Listen to my words. No sin is greater than any other sin. It is entirely true that no single act of sin will send you to hell. The determining factor that speaks to a person's eternal destiny is based upon their submission to the lordship of Jesus Christ and nothing else. So no single act of sin is going to send anybody to hell. You don't go to hell because you commit a sin or even certain types of sins. You can't categorize stuff and say, oh, that's sin, you'd be all right with that. But this sin over here, man, that's bad. That's going to send you right to hell. That's all true. We're destined to hell because we're sinners by our very nature. And salvation comes when we realize that we need someone or something apart from ourselves to save us. And the only thing apart from ourselves that will save us is Jesus Christ. Salvation is through him and him alone. There is no other way to the Father except through Jesus and through his blood. We've established that. So I agree with those who say that sexual immorality, homosexuality, adultery, and premarital sex are no greater than any other sins. That is true. But listen to what I'm going to say now. Those sins are not greater, but they're different. Now, I want that to marinate for a minute. Those sins are not greater, but they are different. Here's why. Remember what Paul said to the Corinthian church in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 18. He said, flee from sexual immorality. Look at what he says here. Every other sin a person commits is outside his body. But the sexually immoral person sins against his own body. Paul throws up a chart and he lists all sins on one side except for the sins of sexual immorality, and he puts them in another column. Not to say they're greater, not to say that there's more consequences in regards to salvation or hell or whatever. He wants to point something out. They are different. I want Diana to throw something up on the screen. She just did. She already did. In his screw tape letters, I wanted to read this to you. I didn't want to just read it out loud. I wanted you to read along with me because I want you to notice some things here. In his screw tape letters, C.S. Lewis says that each time a man and a woman enter into a sexual relation, a spiritual bond, it's a spiritual thing happens between the spirit of the man and the spirit of the woman, or the two people that are engaging in this sexual activity. There is a spiritual connection between each of their spirits, is what he's saying here. A spiritual bond is established between them, which must be externally or eternally enjoyed or eternally endured. Depends on if you're in the right sexual activity or not. Is it between a husband and a wife, or is it apart from a husband and wife? Because there are no allowances for sex outside the relationship of one man, one woman in a marital relationship. There is no other option. And when it's done that way, it is eternally enjoyed. And there are benefits. When it's done outside of that, there are consequences. They might not be immediate, but they will come. And many of those consequences affect our very character and nature because of the spiritual bond that happens between two people that come together in that way. He goes on to say, God takes sexual sin seriously because it corrupts and shatters spiritual relationships, both human and divine. I'm going to throw two things at you real fast on your outline, guys. One, sex affects human relationships at a level unlike anything else in life. When enjoyed as it was intended, a bond like no other is experienced. When it is performed outside of its intended design, it corrupts everything. The second thing is sexual sin is not greater than any other sin, but look, its effects are greater on the family and on society than any other sin. Let me tell you something. As a pastor of 25 years, I have never yet seen anything do more damage to a family and to individuals as the sin of sexual immorality. When affairs happen, it divides, it destroys. When sexual activity outside of the design that God has given us to enjoy it in, it always leaves a wake. And when you start talking to people and when you start looking at people's insecurities and things of those natures, just their personalities, you can trace it back. And you can do it almost every time. I've never seen anything do more damage to a person's life than the sin of sexual immorality. And that is why the Bible speaks so plainly about fleeing from it. Run from it. And this is stuff we've got to be teaching our kids. And it's stuff we've got to be teaching our teenagers. And it's stuff that we've got to be speaking to people that are living outside of the design of God's plan because they are cheating themselves. And we cannot be afraid to speak that message and speak that truth. And that's why we need to teach our young boys, pay attention, be responsible, and take a wife. And we need to teach our young girls, you take care of yourself and you protect yourself because you are precious and you are a precious gift that one day God is going to give to some young man, and you are going to come together in a union that He has designed millenniums ago, and you will be able to enjoy life and experience life at a level that others don't get to because they cheated themselves. And some of you sitting here this morning know exactly what I'm talking about. And I know your heart is for those young people, to encourage them, to not believe the lies of our culture, not to believe what society is throwing at them every day, but say there's a better way. There's a really cool way. And help them see it. When you step back and you're willing to look at sexual relationships outside the design of a heterosexual, monogamous marital relationship, any logical person ought to be able to see this. You ought to be able to see it. When you talk about same-sex relationships for a moment, let's just separate it out from the Bible. Let's say, well, they ain't going to listen to Christian stuff. They ain't going to listen to the Bible. Okay, well, here's another argument. When you're dealing with any type of sexual activity that's outside of a heterosexual life or relationship, let's just talk about this. If you're born male, then you are a man with specific anatomical design. You got manly parts. If you're born with a man, you got manly parts. If you're born a female, you are born a woman with the specific design. You got womanly parts. Guess what? They fit together. They work because you're designed to work that way. But men's parts don't work with men's parts, and women's parts don't look with women's parts, and any logical person ought to be able to know that. They should be able to tell. There is a difference. There's a little cartoon thing years ago I saw, a little boy and a little girl, and they got their underwear and they're pulled back and they go, there's a difference. There is. But our society seems to have forgotten that. And they have just taken everything that was so good and so perfect, and what they have done is they have distorted it. And they've made it what it ought not to be, what it should never be. And it's killing our society. And it's confusing our young men and our young women. And they're buying into lies because everybody's telling them this stuff. And the church is being silent about it. And we will not be a church that's silent about this. Listen, guys, on your outline, sexual activity apart from your anatomical design is a violation of your specific design. You're designed a certain way, and anything apart from that is a violation of that design. Doesn't that make sense to, is anybody else in the room getting this? Surely you see this. You see, this is how silly the arguments are with our culture. It's like, do you not see this? But doesn't everybody deserve to be happy? In the design in which God has created you, you can be the happiest if that's what you're trying to get to. I love what Tim Keller says about this. He said, you cheat yourself if you engage in sex apart from one man and one woman in a marital relationship because you do so against God's design for you. And I could not agree with that more. People are cheating themselves, and here's the thing, they don't even know it. It's true that the world's fighting against God's design for the family, but we cannot let this fight distract us from being who we are called to be. And that is family according to God's design. The Bible's telling us. Here's what I want to come to, because it's very easy to become combative about these issues, guys. I hear it all the time. I see it in life groups. I see it happen in just conversation with the people. It's when they start talking about this stuff, they start getting mad. Listen, here's the deal. We've got a culture that wants to destroy our definition of marriage. We've got a culture that wants to undermine our definition of family. And naturally, we want to fight. But what's the Bible tell us? The Bible says, love your neighbor. The Samaritan story is an awesome story of a guy that loved somebody that hated him. The Bible also tells us to love our enemy. Now, I'm going to tell you what, that's hard for me to swallow sometimes. When I see some of the stuff that's coming down the pike, especially out of our political system and out of Hollywood and stuff like that, it is real hard to love people sometimes like that, right? Right? Whew, man, I thought I was the only sinner in the building. It's real hard, but we're told to. And so we have to minister to whoever the Lord brings into our lives. And some of you have friends and coworkers and stuff that are living lies, and they're caught up in deception, and even family members. And that's a tough place to be. I get that. We have to love them. We have to more than just love them, because it's easy to say, well, I love them. Of course I love them. No, you've got to show them love. You've got to be loving towards them. You see, combative techniques are going to fall every time when they're trying to fight for Judeo-Christian principles and values for the family. You'll fail every time if you go about it in a combative manner. You'll never win. So, last thing I'm going to say this morning, I'm going to get you out of here, because I got to get out of here. And we don't have lunch prepared for you today. Here's your takeaway. Hold to the truth. Live the truth. Speak the truth. But do so in love. And now do this. Display the truth by the way your family lives. Display the truth. Our best weapon is to simply display the truth in our families. And God will take care of the rest. Promise you. Let's pray. Father, thank you again for the truth of your word. It's not always comfortable. It's not always easy, but it is unchangeable. We need to learn to live under it. And I pray that you help us to do that. I want to pray for those who are here this morning that may not yet be a follower of your Son, Jesus. They haven't trusted him for salvation. Maybe they're looking, maybe they're seeking, maybe they're questioning. But I pray for them that they'll submit to your voice and to your call. And they will come to be that man, that woman, that boy, that girl that is known as a child of yours through their repentance. May we be a church that's always ready to embrace them, to stand with them, to equip them, to follow you. Father, today, whatever comes, pray that you use us to honor you. Wherever we go, whatever we say, we pray that it would please you. And I pray this in your name, in Jesus' name. Amen. If you need to connect with me, please use that connection card. Drop it in the box. Throw it in one of those offering plates on your way out the door. Hand it to one of the ladies at the resource table in the lobby, and they will route it to me, and I'll call you, and we'll talk. Have a great day. Enjoy this weather. We don't get this kind of weather in February very often.